Hello, this is Justin at the Tech Train here. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a text-to-binary converter in Microsoft PowerPoint. And for this, we're going to be exploring a little bit more about the developer toolbar. Let me show you how this works. So I have a slide in which we can click and type. And if I type a letter A, for example, then it automatically and immediately converts that into binary. And if I write a few more, A, B, C, you can see that we have the three binary codes for that. It will convert anything at all. In fact, anything at all is exactly that in binary. So let's see how we can create this using PowerPoint and a little bit of code. Let's get started. So although I mentioned that there's a little bit of code included, I will show you everything you need to do, and it's not that complicated, to be honest. And it's quite interesting to discover how you can get PowerPoint to do this sort of thing. So, for example, being able to click inside a text box and write whatever you like, right in the slide as it's in presentation mode, and see this immediate output, which of course we can also copy to the clipboard. You can see there's a button here, and if I click that, that's now been copied to the clipboard. If I clear that and I paste, you can see that's exactly it. So let's see how we do this then. The first thing that we need to have is this developer toolbar. Now it's possible that you've already got that, but a lot of people won't if they've never done code before. So here's how to get the developer toolbar. It's very simple. Simply find a blank area on the ribbon at the top. There's usually an area towards the right hand side that's empty, and right click on it. Then choose Customize the ribbon. Once this panel pops up, you can see that on the right here we have a list of all of the tabs which are in the ribbon at the top. And if you don't have the developer toolbar visible, then this will be unchecked. So simply put a check in that, click OK, and you'll have access to the developer toolbar of wonders. Now let's get started with creating this from scratch. So I have a new slide here. I'm going to change the layout to blank. And I'm just going to change the background to something that will make it a bit easier for us to see. I'll just set this to a grey for the moment so that we can see the contents of the slide a bit more easily. So let's go to the developer toolbar, and the first thing that we want is a text box that we can click in and type while the presentation is running. Obviously you can insert a text box. We're going to insert and shapes. There's a text box at the top left there, but that's not editable while the presentation is running. However, in developer, well, you can see there's a little group of controls here, and the second one that looks like an ABC or an AB and a text cursor, I think that might be, that's the text box control. If we click that, we can click and draw a text box. We will get this warning because we're adding code to PowerPoint. It's just the security settings. Yours will probably do the same thing. We'll just enable ActiveX. That's absolutely fine. And once I've got that text box there, we now have an editable text box. Let's run the presentation, and you can see I can click inside this and type. There we are. The one problem, of course, with that, as you see there, is the font is pretty small. So how do we change the font size within this? It's not going to be the same as you would normally. If I click on this box here and I go to Home and I try and change the font size or font color, you can see that's all locked out. That doesn't work. Instead, what we have to do is right click on this control and choose Property Sheet. There we go. Now this will bring up this panel, which you can resize to fit, but this panel here will have all of the controls and things that we can change about this text box here. So I know this is a little bit different, a little bit unusual, but they should, most of them, make reasonable sense. For example, the back color. What back color do you want behind it? We've got system colors, or you've got, whoops, misclicked on that. We've got system colors or the palette. You've got back style, opaque or transparent, the border color. So you've got quite a few things there that make logical sense, and if there are things that don't, well, just don't worry about them at the moment. Let's click on the font though. Font at the moment is Arial, and we've got this little dot 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 or ellipsis button here, which I click on, and that will bring up the font properties. And I can choose a bigger font here if I want to. Let's just go for, say, a bold. Let's go for, yes, bold Arial, font size 72. There we go. Click OK. And if I want to, I can also change the alignment inside this, the text align property. At the moment it's aligned left, so if I click that and choose center, that will now change the alignment to center. And if I click the close button to close that properties panel and I run the presentation, you can see that this has now changed the font size and the font alignment. Okay, so we've now got, let's get rid of that. So we've now got the text box in our presentation. The next thing we need to do is to have a second text box where the output will be. So as we type something in here, it's going to display the binary code for that. I can simply copy and paste that, and I can change the font size. I probably will need to later on, but for the purpose of this, I'm just going to make that a bit wider so that the 8-bit binary code for our text box will fit. There we go. Now we will also want to change the name of these two objects. You might be familiar if you're creating shapes in PowerPoint of being able to go to the Home tab and then choosing the Select pane and seeing the name of the objects in your presentation. One of the things that we can do here is change the name of these text boxes in the property sheet. So this first one is text box 1. Now we're going to have two text boxes, and it probably makes sense for us to understand at a glance which one is which. So let's call this one text input, because that's where we're inputting the text that we want to convert into binary code. And this one here, we'll click on this one, and in the name box we'll type text output, just so I know exactly which one is which. So there we are, we've now named those. If I go to the Home tab and the Selection pane here, you'll see that those names do update there as well, so you can name them in either position. But I tend to prefer making all the changes to these in the property sheet just to keep things organised. Okay, so we now need a little bit of code. And again, if you've looked at the videos that I've done before using the developer toolbar and using code in PowerPoint, you might think I'm going to head over to Visual Basic. But I'm not, because for this we're actually going to put the code, or embed the code if you like, inside these controls. So these controls run the code rather than a button somewhere else. It's a little bit of a different way of working, but hopefully this will make sense. I'm going to double click this button, this text box, and you see it brings up the same window that you might be familiar with if you've looked at other videos on this channel about code. The one thing that you might spot is different is that on the left hand side here, normally what we do is we right click and insert a module, but we're not doing that this time. Instead, this has created a subroutine for our text input text box, and this is part of slide 1. So this is all embedded into that particular slide. You'll also notice that as well as having this subroutine specifically for that text input text box, it's also added this underscore change. And on the right hand side, you do have a little drop down list here of other triggers that we can use. In this case, change is what we want. So whenever the contents of text input change, something happens. But you can see that you've got other options here. So for example, if we double click inside the box, we could have something happen. Got focus, so we're clicking on the box or tabbing to it to be selected. Key downs, we're pressing a key on the keyboard down. So there's various things that we can have as triggers. We're not going to do anything with that. I just thought it might be interesting to point that out in case this is a bit new to you. All right, so let's now think about the subroutine that we need for the text input. What do we want to happen when someone clicks inside the text box and starts typing? So the first thing that we need to do is to create a few variables that we're going to use to store little bits of information. We'll use the dim, short for dimension, to create these variables. The first one is going to be input text. So this is going to be the text that the user types into that text box, and we're going to define the type of that variable as a string. String is just basically anything, text, whatever. It doesn't really worry too much about the content of that. Now we need to also output the binary code, so we're going to have output binary. So that's just the ones and zeros eventually, but we're going to treat that as a string as well. We're not actually doing any maths with this, not at this stage anyway. We'll need to have a loop later on. We're going to cycle through and do some calculations later on. So we're going to have I as a counter. We'll have that as an integer, whole number. And then finally we're going to have another variable, which is again going to be a number. We'll have this as an integer. Character code is going to be the ASCII value of the characters that we type in. So if I type in A, every character on your keyboard that you could possibly type has an ASCII number associated with it. If you want to learn a little bit more about ASCII and how that all works, there's a video which I will link to below, and hopefully at the moment at the top right corner of your screen there should be a little info card just linking to that video, so you can learn a little bit more about ASCII. But basically every letter is going to convert to a number, a whole number, which we're then going to convert into binary later on. Okay, so those are our variables. That's all we need for the moment. So we need to have our input text variable actually have the content of whatever is in that text box. So input text equals, and we're going to be looking into the active presentation that we're in at the moment, and dot slides, it's slide number 1. Obviously, if you're doing this on a slide further into your presentation, just change that number, but I'm on slide 1. And then we're going to look at the shapes, and the shape that this is called is input text box. That's what we called it earlier on. Now, because again, if you've done this sort of coding with me before, you'll be familiar with this sort of line of code, but this is slightly different now because we're not using shapes, we're using those ActiveX controls in the developer toolbar. So this is slightly different, and it's going to be OLE format dot object dot text. So that's how we get the text from a text box which is created using those ActiveX controls. Now the output for the moment, the output binary value, that's going to be blank for the moment, so we're going to empty that. It may already have got something in it if we've already done some calculations, but for the moment let's just now this content of the text input has changed. We'll make sure that that value is blank, and we need to now loop through all of the characters inside this text box. So we've looked at that input text box, we've popped that value into the variable input text. We don't know how many characters there are in it, so we're going to loop through every single character, and then we're going to take each character and convert it to ASCII first of all, and then convert that ASCII number to binary. So we need to have a loop, and we've got I as our integer counter for that. So for I, and it's going to be for 1 to whatever the length of the input text variable is. So if it's 1 character, we'll just do this once. So it's 10 characters. For I equals 1 to len input text. So yes, if it's 10 characters in there, it'll repeat this loop 10 times. Now our character code variable that we had earlier on, this is going to equal the ASCII value of, and we can actually type ASC, that will the PowerPoint code will understand what we mean by that. It'll convert whatever's in brackets into the ASCII code, but it's not going to be the whole of that variable. It's going to be the mid. Mid is just a case of pull part of a string out. So mid, what is the mid of? It's the input text variable. Where are we starting? We're looking at I, which is going to start off as 1 and then 2 then 3 and so forth. And how many characters do we want to pull out? Just the 1. Okay, close those 2 brackets. There we are. So that now will look at whatever character we're up to in our string and convert that into ASCII, and then store that ASCII value in our variable character code. Now our output binary string is going to equal whatever it is now. We made it blank just here, but of course we're now looping through the string in the input text box. So at some point in this loop, assuming that we're looping more than once, output binary, our binary code, will already have some content in it. So it's going to equal whatever it already is now. So it's going to equal itself. And so we are concatenating or joining something else to it. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to write decimal to binary of whatever is stored in character code. And then after that, we're also going to have a space. So we're going to put a little space in there to separate the 8-bit binary numbers, as you saw in the demonstration. Now, you might be looking at this thinking, oh, decimal to binary, that's a really handy function included in PowerPoint. I'm afraid it's not. That is a function we're going to have to create later on. So we're going to have to work out how to convert from decimal to binary. So, for example, if I was to type the letter A, then that value there has an ASCII value of 65. So we know the value of a letter A is 65, but we need to convert that 65 into binary, and that will give us the binary value of the letter 65. Oh, sorry, of the letter A. So that's a little function we're going to do in a bit. However, for the moment, that's all we need to do in our loop. So we can see next I, that's it. And we'll just be looping through that however many times there are letters in our string. Now, once we've done that, the output binary will have a binary code, which we can then add to our output text box. So that's this one here, the bottom one. So what we do here, very simply, we're again going to reference the active presentation, because you could have more than one PowerPoint presentation open at the time. So it's the active one, the one we're in right now. Again, it's slide 1. And it is this time the shape called output text box. And again, because it's an ActiveX control, we need to do the OLE format dot object dot text. And what is that going to equal? That's going to equal the value of output binary, like that. There we go. So that's it for that text box. So that text box now has all of that information in it, all that code. And if we were to run this presentation and click in there and start typing, it would attempt to convert the text. However, it's going to give me an error because, of course, the sub or function decimal to binary does not exist. We know that because we haven't written it yet. So the next step then is to start working out how to convert from decimal to binary. So let's do that let's do that subroutine. So before we jump into writing the code for converting the decimal to binary, let's have a quick understanding of how this is going to work. So as I said, the capital A has an ASCII value of 65. So that's the value we want to turn into binary code. Now for binary code, we need to have an idea of place value. In base 10 decimal, we have place value of units, tens, hundreds and thousands and so forth. But that's different in binary because base 10 decimal, you're multiplying by 10 every time you move to the left. In binary though, it's different. You start with units, but then you multiply that by 2, decimal, binary. Then you multiply by 2 again and by 2 again. And each time you move to the left, you're multiplying by 2 rather than by 10 because we're in base 2, binary, rather than base 10, decimal. Now what we need to do is have a loop that goes through using this number, asking the same question several times. And the question is the value we've currently got here, in this case 65, greater than or equal to the value that we're looking at in the current column? So we start on the left hand side. This is our first column. 128. Is 65 greater than or equal to 128? No, it isn't. So if the answer is no, we put a 0. We then move to the next column, 64. Is the value of 65 greater than or equal to 64? Yes, it is, so it gets a 1, and because we write a 1, we have to take this value, 64, away from the value that we're currently working from. So 65 minus 64 gives us a value of 1. So that's now the value that we're asking this question with. So is the value of 1 greater than or equal to 32? No, it isn't. Is it greater than or equal to 16? No. 8? No. 4? No. 2? No. And finally, is the value of 1 greater than or equal to the value of 1? Yes, it is. We put a 1 there. And again, we can do the whole, right, take the value of 1 from 1 gives us 0, which means that we are now done. And so the value of 65 converted into binary is 01000001. So that's a really quick crash course on how to convert decimal to binary, but I think it's important we understand how we're doing it so the code makes a little bit more sense. If you want more information on how to convert decimal to binary, again, I have done a video on that in more depth. There's a link in the description, and I hope a card at the top right corner right now, which will show you how to convert from decimal to binary if you want more information. Okay, so now we understand the concept of how to do it. Let's put this into code. So just before I create the subroutine that will convert our ASCII value into binary, I have just noticed a small error that I did earlier on, and that's the names that I used for the two text boxes, which are not correct. I was thinking of the version I used in the demonstration at the beginning of the video rather than the one I created during the video. So if I just quickly pop back over here, go to Home, select Selection Pane. The first box I can see is I call text input, the second one text output. That's not what's in my code, so let me just change that quickly here. So that was text input, input, and the one that's outputting the binary code is text output. There we go. It doesn't really matter what you call them as long as they match, obviously, as long as the names of the text boxes in the presentation match what's in your code. Right, okay, time to do the function then for converting an ASCII value, decimal value, into binary. This is not a subroutine linked to a button or anything like that. It's just simply referenced by using the name of this function, decimal to binary. So what we'll do is type function and then decimal to binary, making sure the name is the same. And this function here is going to require a value to be given to it. You'll notice up here when I call or request the program to use my function decimal to binary, I've got something in brackets straight afterwards. What that means is go and do this bit of code using this value, that character code, which is going to be the ASCII value of the letter that we're looking at the moment. So that value there needs to be pulled into our function. And we're going to give it, if you like, a variable name. You can think of it as, this is going to be by val, we'll call it dec, it'll be a decimal value, and this will be an integer. So press enter and we get our end function automatically, of course. And we need a couple of variables here. We're going to have a binary string. Now I know that binary is obviously a value, but this is going to be simply for displaying this as characters in the text box. So that is going to be a string. I also need a value. We'll see how I'm going to use that in a moment. We'll call that value. That's going to be a decimal value. And that value is going to be the first of our 8 columns. So in that case, it's going to be 128. That's the value we're starting with, or the column that we're starting with. And our binary string, when we begin this, is going to be empty. It's going to be blank. So we put speech marks with nothing between them. Now we need to start our loop, and the loop is repeating, going from one column to the next, asking that question, is the value that I'm working with at the moment greater than or equal to the value of the column that I'm currently in? So we have what we call a do-while loop. We could have this as a for I equals 1 to 8. We could just do it 8 times, but there's no point. We don't always need to. For example, if the value I was thinking of was 128, well, that equals, it's greater than or equal to the first column, in which case we don't need to ask the same question another 7 times. So we'll do while the value that we are currently working with, the column, is greater than or equal to 1. So we haven't subtracted enough yet for it to get down to 1. So there's going to be a question that we have to ask here, and that is whether the decimal value that we've been given, 65 in our example earlier on, 65 wasn't it earlier on, whether that is greater than or equal to the value of the column that we're currently in. So if the value that we're looking at, if the decimal value is greater than or that's supposed to be equal to value, then we do 2 things. So we know that that means that we have a 1, so our binary string is going to equal whatever it is now. So we're not going to replace it, we're going to keep adding 1s and 0s until we got all 8 of them, and the character 1. And of course, if we find we have got a 1, we need to subtract the value of the current column from our decimal value. So a dec is going to be whatever it is now minus the value. Now that's the case if the decimal value is greater than or equal to the column value. If it isn't, so else, then we need a 0, of course. So our binary string is going to equal our binary string added on with a 0. And that's it. That's all we need to ask in terms of, it's one thing, it can only be 1 or a 0. Now once we've done that, we need to look at the next column. Now we could have, as I said, a loop that goes through each column 1 to 8, but we don't need that because value is 128. We know our next value is going to be half of that. So 128 is the first column, 64 is the next one, which is half of it, 32, 16, 8, 4, 2, 1. So it's going to half each time. So we can simply say value equals value divided by 2. That ends our loop, so we can write the word loop, and at the end of that loop we will have our binary code, our binary value. So we need to, because this is a function, we're not sending it straight to the text box or whatever, we are simply at the end of this function resulting in that value. So our decimal to binary function is going to be binary string, whatever's in that string. And there we go, that's the code that we need for that. Now we're going to save this presentation before we start running it, but really importantly, when you save a presentation that includes code like this, you can't just simply save it as you would normally. When you go to the Save As box, you'll see underneath the name Save As Type. And it's really important that you change it from what it will be, which is PowerPoint presentation, to PowerPoint macro enabled presentation. Macro enabled simply means you're enabling or including the code that we've just written. If you weren't to choose that option, PowerPoint would simply delete the code. So make sure that you choose PowerPoint macro enabled presentation and then hit save. And now we've got those 2 subroutines, or one subroutine and a function, we can run our presentation. Let's use the example that we did earlier on with the letter A. So if I press A, you can see that immediately our output box generates that code, 01000001, which of course is what we worked out earlier on the whiteboard. And of course, if I add a second letter in there, we get the second value, and so forth. Now you'll see that if I keep on typing, it keeps on updating, but it's not big enough to fill all of that. So what I could do in this box here, if I right click and choose Property Sheet, is a couple of things. First of all, let's reduce the font size. We don't need it quite that big. So I'll reduce the font size down to, say, 28. There we go. I'll also change it to multi-line. So normally these text boxes, you can't sort of press enter and go on to the next line. It's just literally one long line of code. Multi-line is set to false. If I double click multi-line, you see it switches to true, or you can simply use the drop down. So that's now multi-line. What I'll also do is just increase the height of that slightly. So now if I type in here the tech train, then you can see we've got all the binary code for that. So that is it really. We've now already got our conversion. There are a couple of things that we could add to this, which I did include at the beginning, which is how to have a button that clears this box. Pretty straightforward, and also a button which copies this to the clipboard. I'm not going to include that in this presentation because it's not core to how this works. If you would like to have a copy of the PowerPoint presentation I showed at the beginning, which is this one here, if you'd like a copy of this, which of course not only works but also has all of the codes, you can see the code for copy to clipboard there, and for the clear button, so if you're quick and you screenshot it, you can get it there. But if you want to have that, there's a link in the description and you can go and grab a copy of this as well. So I hope that was useful to you. I hope you learned a couple of things through that. If you did, please do like this video, click the like button, that would be fantastic. If you like this kind of content, then do consider subscribing. And if you have any questions or comments at all, do leave them below and I will try to reply to as many as I possibly can. So thank you very much indeed for watching. I hope you enjoyed that and I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Bye for now.